Chapter 1: The Hidden Strengths of the Human Mind. Think about a moment in your life when everything suddenly went wrong. It could have been a car swerving into your lane on a rain-slicked highway, a sudden medical emergency with a loved one, or a catastrophic failure in a major project at work. In that compressed, breathless fraction of a second, what did you do? You did not reach for a pen and a piece of paper. You did not brainstorm a comprehensive list of potential reactions. You did not assign numerical weights to the risks and benefits of each alternative, carefully tallying up the scores to arrive at the mathematically optimal choice. If you had attempted to do any of those things, the window for survival or success would have slammed shut. You simply acted. You drew upon something deep inside yourself, recognized what the moment demanded, and you moved. For decades, the professional and academic worlds have been obsessed with our intellectual flaws. We have been endlessly told that the human mind is fundamentally irrational, hopelessly clouded by cognitive biases, and entirely undependable in a crisis. To save us from our own incompetence, experts have prescribed rigid, analytical frameworks. We are taught that true professional decision-making requires generating a wide array of options, exhaustively researching every piece of data, and scoring each path on a calculated matrix to find the single best answer. This slow, deliberate process is held up as the ultimate gold standard of human rationality. But there is a glaring problem with this gold standard. It rarely exists outside the sterile, artificial confines of a testing laboratory. When we observe how highly experienced professionals actually operate in the real world, the illusion of the analytical matrix completely shatters. Imagine an older construction foreman, a man who has spent 30 years pulling heavy structures out of the deep earth. He is standing at the edge of a massive, freshly dug trench where his crew is working below to lay a heavy pipeline. The steel shoring is in place, the soil looks standard, the weather is clear. By every traditional metric, the site is perfectly secure. Yet, as the foreman stands near the edge, a strange, cold knot forms in his stomach. The air feels unusually still. The diesel hum of the excavator sounds slightly muffled. The dirt near his boots has a subtle, almost imperceptible, crumbly texture that does not fit the visual profile of the surrounding earth. He cannot put his finger on exactly what is wrong, but an overwhelming wave of unease washes over him. He does not stop to gather more data. He does not convene a committee to discuss the probabilistic risk of a trench collapse. He simply yells for his crew to drop their tools and get out immediately. The workers grumble. They complain about losing valuable time and money as they slowly climb the ladders to the surface. But less than a minute after the last worker clears the edge, a massive, silent slide of earth gives way, completely burying the trench under tons of crushing debris. Had the crew stayed, they would not have survived. If you were to ask that foreman how he knew to pull his men out, he would likely struggle to give you a satisfying answer. He might shrug and say he just had a gut feeling or a sixth sense, but it was not magic, and it was certainly not luck. He was utilizing a profound, highly evolved cognitive strength. He was drawing on an immense internal database of thousands of past experiences, unconsciously matching the subtle, invisible anomalies of the present moment against the deeply ingrained patterns of his past. He was reading the situation with a mental power that standard analytical models entirely ignore. When we step into the real world, we leave behind the neat, well-defined puzzles of the classroom. The environments where we actually live and work are fiercely unforgiving. They are defined by immense time pressure, where choices must be made in minutes or even seconds. They involve remarkably high stakes, where a wrong move can cost millions of dollars, a lifetime of reputation, or even human life. They are saturated with missing, ambiguous, or completely incorrect information. Furthermore, the goals are rarely clear. In the heat of a crisis, the target is constantly moving, and the conditions are endlessly shifting. If you put a novice in this kind of chaotic environment, they will freeze. A beginner will desperately try to lean on step-by-step procedures, comparing options and begging for more information to reduce their paralyzing uncertainty, but a seasoned veteran operates entirely differently. There is a long-standing myth in the realm of decision-making that claims a choice is only valid if you have consciously weighed at least two competing options. The theory suggests that a rational person will always find a favorite course of action and then actively compare it against a backup plan to justify their final move. But when researchers finally ventured into the field to study masters of their craft operating under pressure, they made a startling discovery. The experts were not comparing two options. In fact, they were rarely comparing any options at all. Whether it is an emergency room nurse reading the declining color in a patient's face, a pilot responding to a sudden loss of altitude, or a business leader sensing a shift in a tense negotiation, the most experienced among us do not decide by eliminating alternatives. They look at a situation, their vast experience instantly categorizes the event, and a single viable course of action naturally presents itself. They do not waste precious time searching for the mathematically perfect solution. They use their deep reservoir of lived experience to find the first workable solution, and they act. This is not a sign of impulsive recklessness. It is the hallmark of true mastery. We possess an incredible arsenal of cognitive tools that go far beyond deductive logic and statistical analysis. We have the power of intuition, the ability to build rich mental simulations, the capacity to learn through stories, and the genius of metaphorical thinking. These are the hidden strengths of the human mind, the actual sources of power that allow us to navigate the beautiful, terrifying, and unpredictable reality of our lives. To understand how to make better choices, we must stop apologizing for these instincts and begin to understand the magnificent engine that drives them. Chapter 2. The Recognition Engine. There is a profound, almost musical elegance in the way a master practices their craft. Have you ever watched a brilliant chef operate during the chaotic, overwhelming dinner rush of a world-class restaurant? The kitchen is a symphony of fire, shouting, clattering steel, and relentless pressure. In this blistering environment, things inevitably go wrong. A sauce breaks, a delicate piece of fish cooks too quickly, or an entire order is dropped. Yet, the master chef does not freeze. They do not pull out a notepad to weigh the pros and cons of their next culinary maneuver. They look at the broken sauce, and in a fraction of a second, their hands are already moving to fix it. They are operating on a remarkably sophisticated mental framework, an internal process that seamlessly fuses the ability to instantly size up a situation with the capacity to evaluate a course of action by simply imagining it. They are running their recognition engine. When highly experienced people face a complex scenario, their brains do not work like calculators. They work like immense, rapid-fire, pattern-matching machines. They survey the chaos and instantly recognize the situation as typical and familiar. This recognition is not just a vague feeling of déjà vu, it is a highly structured cognitive event that automatically delivers 4 vital byproducts directly into the decision-maker's conscious mind. First, they immediately understand which plausible goals make sense to pursue. Second, their attention is automatically drawn to the relevant cues, filtering out the overwhelming noise and focusing only on the exact details that matter. Third, they instantly form a set of expectancies about what will happen next, allowing them to brace for the future and notice any sudden surprises. And fourth, the recognition process automatically serves up a typical, reliable course of action. When all these pieces align perfectly, it results in a simple match. The chef sees the exact color of the searing meat, recognizes the familiar prototype of the cooking process, knows to watch the edges for browning, expects it to be ready in exactly 60 seconds, and has their tongues ready to flip it. The decision is virtually instantaneous. The expertise lies purely in recognizing that the antecedent conditions have been met, but real life is rarely that cooperative. Often, the environment throws us a curveball. Imagine our chef looks at that same pan, but the meat is not searing. It is boiling in its own juices, and the color is an agonizing dull gray. The pattern is broken. The chef's expectancies have been violently violated. When this happens, experienced individuals do not blindly push forward, nor do they collapse into indecision. They instantly shift into a diagnostic mode. They recognize the anomaly and pause to gather more data, trying to clarify the ambiguity. The chef might check the stove's flame, touch the raw ingredients to check their starting temperature, or smell the cooking oil. If the situation still does not make sense, the mind will automatically begin story building, trying to construct a logical narrative that accounts for the inconsistencies. The chef builds a rapid mental story. Perhaps the junior prep cook pulled the meat directly from the freezer instead of letting it rest, causing the cold center to drop the temperature of the oil, ruining the sear. Once the story locks into place and the situation is finally diagnosed as a new, recognizable prototype, the typical course of action is unlocked and the chef moves to salvage the dish. Yet, knowing what action to take is only half the battle. How do we know the action will actually work if we do not compare it against a list of other options? This is where the human mind performs one of its most breathtaking tricks. We evaluate a single course of action by imagining it. We run a mental simulation, playing the action out in our minds like a movie to see what will happen if the chef decides to salvage the cold meat by cranking the industrial burner to its absolute maximum. They do not just do it blindly. They simulate the action internally. In their mind's eye, they see the burner roar to life. They imagine the oil rapidly overheating. They anticipate that the sudden, violent heat will scorch the outside of the meat into a bitter, charred crust while leaving the inside raw. The mental movie reveals a catastrophic pitfall. So, the chef modifies the action in their mind or rejects it entirely and moves on to evaluate the next most typical solution. They cycle through these options one at a time, evaluating each on its own merits without ever comparing them side by side. This singular evaluation is driven by a deeply practical philosophy. We are not searching for the absolute perfect, mathematically optimal solution. We are searching for the first workable option we can find. This strategy of finding the first acceptable path is known as satisficing, and it is vastly more efficient than agonizing over the illusion of perfection, because the options we generate are drawn from a deep well of lived experience. The very first idea that pops into an expert's head is usually highly effective, meaning we do not need to waste precious time brainstorming a massive list of alternatives just to ensure we find a good one. To truly appreciate the power of this recognition engine, we only need to look at what happens when it is entirely absent. When people are complete novices, lacking the deep experience required to recognize a situation as typical, they cannot rely on their intuition. Without a mental archive of prototypes, they are forced to do exactly what traditional models prescribe. They must painstakingly deliberate, generate multiple options, and compare the advantages and disadvantages of each. Imagine a junior line cook, fresh out of culinary school, facing that same boiling gray piece of meat. They have no experience to draw upon. Their heads turn to stone. They pull back and desperately try to remember their textbook training. Should they turn up the heat? Should they throw the meat away and start over? Should they slice it thin and change the recipe entirely? They weigh the costs of food waste against the wrath of the executive chef. They compare the options concurrently, burning valuable time while the dish completely deteriorates on the stove. Comparing multiple options is the desperate fallback mechanism of the beginner. The seasoned professional lives in a state of constant, fluid readiness. They are poised to act, forever scanning the horizon for familiar shapes, running rapid mental tests, and trusting the profound intelligence of their own experience. They have traded the paralysis of endless comparison for the beautiful decisive momentum of recognition. Chapter 3. The True Nature of Intuition. There is a story about a man who had driven the exact same subterranean transit route for 2 decades. He knew every turn, every flicker of the fluorescent tunnel lights, and every vibration of the tracks. One Tuesday morning, while pulling his massive, crowded train into a bustling downtown station, he suddenly threw the emergency brake. The train came to a screeching, violent halt just inches before a blind, sweeping curve. Passengers were thrown against the handrails, furious and bewildered. The operator himself did not know why he did it. He just felt a sudden, terrible dread wash over him. Seconds later, station security radioed in to report that a structural pillar had collapsed just around the bend, covering the tracks in tons of concrete. When reporters later asked the operator how he knew to stop, he shook his head and called it his guardian angel, a sudden flash of a sixth sense. This is exactly how we usually talk about intuition. We treat it as something supernatural, an unexplainable, mystical force that descends from the heavens to save us in our darkest hours. Because people cannot describe what they noticed or how they judged a situation, intuition has earned a very strange, almost unreliable reputation. We are taught to be highly suspicious of it. We feel deeply uncomfortable trusting a source of power that seems so accidental and irrational. preferring instead to rely on cold, hard data. But the veteran train operator was not experiencing magic. He was relying on a profoundly biological, deeply ingrained pattern-matching process. He did not know why he stopped, because he was likely reacting to things that were not happening rather than things that were. Perhaps the ambient echo of the tunnel sounded slightly muffled because the fallen concrete was absorbing the noise. Perhaps the air pressure pushing ahead of his train felt subtly different. Over 20 years, his thousands of routine trips had blended together in his mind into a single, subconscious baseline of what a safe tunnel feels like. When the current reality deviated from that immense experience base, his brain sent a massive physical warning signal before his conscious mind could even process the danger. Intuition is not an inborn magical trait that some lucky people are born with and others lack. It grows directly and firmly out of our hard-earned experience. It is simply the ability to recognize key patterns that indicate the hidden dynamics of a situation. Consider a veteran agricultural inspector walking into a vast, heavily climate-controlled commercial greenhouse. The novice farmers managing the facility are incredibly proud. The plants are vividly green. The humidity is perfectly calibrated. The computer sensors show zero problems. The veteran takes 3 steps into the humid room, pauses, and quietly announces that the entire crop is suffering from a devastating, fast-moving fungal blight. The novices are bewildered and defensive. The laboratory tests take 2 agonizing days to return, but when they do, the veteran is proven absolutely correct. When asked how she knew, she simply says she had a gut feeling. When we dig deeper into these gut feelings, we find highly specific physical realities. The veteran was picking up on a faint, almost imperceptible sweet odor in the air that the sensors could not read. She noticed a slight, unnatural curling of the lowest leaves that beginners entirely ignore. She saw a subtle absence of the normal, microscopic dust on the stems. She was reacting to a complex pattern of cues, each one incredibly subtle, that together signaled an impending disaster. Often, true masters cannot articulate these cues because the patterns are so deeply embedded in their everyday perception. But this reveals a beautiful truth. Intuition can be unpacked, understood, and trained. If we take the time to observe what the experts are actually noticing, we can extract those invisible perceptual cues and teach them to beginners. We can design experiences that rapidly accelerate a person's ability to size up a situation accurately. Intuition does not have to remain locked away in the realm of the specialist. It can be cultivated. Sometimes, however, intuition is not about recognizing a familiar, comforting pattern. It is about detecting a frightening mismatch. Imagine an experienced wilderness search and rescue leader guiding a team up a steep, snow-covered ridge. The weather forecast is perfectly clear. The snowpack seems solid, and the path is a well-worn route he has traveled dozens of times. But halfway up the ascent, the leader abruptly stops the team and orders an immediate, rapid retreat. He cannot explain it to his frustrated crew. The mountain just feels wrong. He privately wonders if he is just being paranoid. Hours later, from the safety of the base camp, they watch a massive, lethal avalanche wipe out the exact trail they were standing on. What did he sense? He expected the snow under his heavy boots to compress with a certain rhythmic, resistant crunch. Instead, it felt slightly too hollow. He expected a certain wind pattern over the northern ridge, but the air was eerily dead. His deep-seated expectancies were violated. When the environmental cues do not fit together, the experienced mind instantly detects an anomaly. The reaction is a powerful, intuitive urge to pull back, regroup, and try to get a better sense of what is really going on. Of course, intuition is not infallible. Our experience will sometimes mislead us, causing us to confidently misread a situation and make a mistake. We have all had moments where we felt absolutely certain we recognized a landmark in an unfamiliar city, only to take a confident turn that leaves us completely lost. But these mistakes simply become new data points, adding to our vast experience base. To live fully and decide effectively, we must stop viewing intuition as a flaw in our logic. It is the silent, instant translation of our entire past into our present. It is the quiet voice of everything we have ever lived, learned, and survived, guiding us safely through the dark. Chapter 4. Seeing the Future. The Power of Mental Simulation. There is a private, invisible theater inside your mind where the laws of physics, time, and consequence are entirely under your control. Every day, without even realizing you are doing it, you step into this theater to watch events unfold before they ever happen in the physical world. If you are standing in your living room holding a heavy, awkwardly shaped piece of furniture and trying to figure out how to maneuver it up a narrow, winding staircase, you do not just start shoving it against the walls. You close your eyes or stare blankly at the stairs, and you build a dynamic internal movie. You imagine lifting the front end. You picture the back leg catching on the banister. You mentally rotate the piece, visualizing how the weight will shift into your partner's hands. Only when the movie plays all the way through to a successful conclusion do you finally take your first step. This profound human capability is known as mental simulation. It is not merely the act of holding a static picture in your head. It is the active construction of an unfolding sequence of events, complete with moving parts, transitions, and changing states. We rely on this mental engine to evaluate our intuitive choices, bridging the gap between where we are and where we need to be. Imagine a veteran emergency rescue commander arriving at the scene of a horrific multi-vehicle collision on an icy mountain pass. A massive commercial truck has pinned a small passenger car against a concrete barrier, trapping the driver inside a crushed shell of steel. The commander approaches the wreckage and sees that the doors are completely mangled and fused shut. He knows that simply prying the doors open with heavy hydraulic tools will take too long and might critically jar the injured driver. The situation is desperate, and the freezing temperatures are severely limiting their time. The commander does not convene a panel to discuss extraction theories. Instead, he stands in the freezing rain and runs a rapid mental simulation. He imagines his crew bringing out heavy cutting equipment to completely sever the roof posts. He plays the movie forward in his mind, the sparks flying, the metal snapping, the heavy roof being lifted away. Then he visualizes his medics stepping smoothly into the open vehicle, securing the driver's spine, sliding the seat backward to clear the steering column, and hoisting the driver vertically out of the wreckage. He watches this internal sequence, specifically hunting for pitfalls, searching for any detail that might cause a catastrophic failure. He realizes in his simulation that the driver's legs might get caught under the crushed dashboard during the vertical lift. Having anticipated this pitfall, he adjusts the plan in his mind, assigning one crew member specifically to monitor and free the driver's legs. The mental movie plays smoothly to the end. He opens his eyes, gives the orders, and the crew executes the extraction flawlessly, exactly as he had envisioned it. This is how we evaluate our intuitive choices without needing to compare them against a dozen other options. We put our single, leading idea under a mental microscope, running it through the crucible of our imagination to see if it will actually work. However, this incredible mental simulator comes with profound biological limitations. Constructing these dynamic movies requires a massive amount of working memory. To keep the simulation running smoothly without becoming overwhelmed, the human brain typically limits these scenarios to about 3 moving parts, progressing through roughly 6 distinct transitions. If you try to imagine a machine with 20 interlocking gears all spinning at different speeds, your mental image will rapidly blur and collapse. We instinctively simplify the world in our minds so we can process it, chunking complex actions together and ignoring irrelevant background noise. But this simplification points to the dark side of mental simulation. The greatest danger of this cognitive tool is that once we construct a compelling story in our minds, we tend to fall deeply in love with it. We become so emotionally attached to our own mental movie that we begin to force reality to match our expectations. Imagine a brilliant cybersecurity expert working the night shift at a global financial institution. At 2 a.m, a strange, unauthorized access beacon flares on his monitor. He immediately uses his experience to build a mental simulation explaining the past. He imagines that the new, inexperienced IT vendor in the overseas office must have accidentally misconfigured a routing protocol during a scheduled system update. It makes perfect sense. The story is clean, logical, and comforting. A few minutes later, a second alarm goes off, showing a massive data packet being encrypted. This piece of evidence actively contradicts his story. An IT vendor would not be encrypting outbound data, but because the expert is locked into his initial mental simulation, he explains the disconfirming evidence away. He rationalizes that the vendor must have triggered an automated security sweep. 10 minutes later, the firewall drops entirely. The expert twists the facts again, minimizing the anomaly by assuming the vendor is performing a hard system reboot. He engages in what is known as a de minimis explanation, constantly smoothing over the jagged, terrifying reality to protect the comfortable narrative he has built in his head. By the time the expert finally realizes the network is not undergoing a clumsy update, but is actually enduring a highly coordinated, devastating cyber attack, it is far too late. Millions of records have been stolen. The expert's mental simulation did not fail because he lacked intelligence. It failed because the power of his imagination was actively used against itself. He used his formidable intellect to explain away every warning sign that threatened his preferred version of reality. When we are under pressure, the strain of pushing away inconvenient evidence eventually catches up with us. There is a moment when the illusion violently shatters, a phenomenon known as snapback, where the sheer weight of reality finally crushes the mental simulation, forcing us to wake up and see the world as it truly is. But waiting for snapback in a high-stakes environment is incredibly dangerous. To protect ourselves from the arrogance of our own imaginations, we must actively break our emotional attachment to our plans. The most powerful way to do this is a simple, profound mental exercise known as the pre-mortem. Whenever you are about to launch a new project, commit to a major life change, or execute a high-stakes strategy, do not just imagine the plan succeeding. That is too easy. Instead, force yourself to look months into the future and imagine that the plan has been carried out and it has been an absolute, unmitigated disaster. Picture the wreckage. Feel the sting of failure. Now, standing in the ashes of that imaginary catastrophe, trace your steps backward and explain exactly why it failed. When you shift your perspective from defending your brilliant plan to actively hunting for the reasons it died, you unleash your creativity in a completely different direction. You are no longer blinding yourself to the flaws, you are rewarding yourself for finding them. You will suddenly see the hidden vulnerabilities, the ignored risks, and the arrogant assumptions that were completely invisible just moments before. Mental simulation is our own private time machine. It allows us to rewind the past to understand a mystery, and it allows us to fast forward into the future to walk the paths we have not yet taken. When we temper this profound imagination with the humility to question our own stories, we stop being victims of circumstance and become the true architects of our own destiny. Chapter 5. Spotting leverage points and thinking non-linearly. When you encounter an impossibly heavy door that is stuck in its frame, your first instinct is usually to push harder. If it still does not move, you might step back, take a running start, and throw your entire body weight against the wood. We are culturally conditioned to believe that the answer to any massive resistance is an equally massive application of force. If a project is failing, we work twice as many hours. If a negotiation is stalling, we argue twice as loudly. But when you watch deeply experienced individuals handle insurmountable obstacles, they rarely use brute force. Instead of sweating and straining against the center of the door, they step back, run their hands along the edges, and quietly look for the hinge. They are searching for a leverage point, a specific, highly sensitive area where a tiny, well-placed shift can alter the dynamics of the entire system. A leverage point is not a magic button. It is a physical or conceptual fulcrum that only becomes visible through the lens of vast experience. Consider a frantic scene in the belly of a massive commercial cargo ship drifting helplessly in a busy shipping lane. The primary engine has completely shut down and the vessel is at the mercy of the ocean currents. Down in the sweltering engine room, a team of young, highly educated marine mechanics is scrambling in a state of near panic. They have blueprints unrolled across steel tables, desperately tracing electrical lines and fuel pathways. They are thinking in rigid, sequential steps, preparing to completely dismantle the primary fuel injection manifold, a process that will take 12 agonizing hours that the drifting ship does not have. Then, an older, semi-retired chief engineer is lowered down onto the deck. He does not look at the blueprints. He walks slowly around the massive engine block, closing his eyes to listen to the faint residual hum of the auxiliary generators. He places his bare hand against a seemingly random sequence of thick steel pipes, feeling the subtle differences in temperature and vibration. He walks over to a secondary coolant bypass line, pulls a heavy wrench from his belt, and gives a single, precise, violent strike to a specific brass valve. Instantly, a pressurized hiss echoes through the chamber, fuel begins to flow, and the massive engine roars back to life. The young mechanics are stunned. They ask him how he knew the entire engine block was failing because of one sticky bypass valve. The chief engineer cannot give them a simple, step-by-step formula. He spotted the leverage point because decades of living inside those ships had given him a profound mental model of how the entire ecosystem of the engine breathed and functioned. He did not see individual parts. He saw the invisible flow of pressure and heat. When he felt a pipe that was slightly too cold, his experience instantly highlighted a hidden bottleneck. He used a tiny amount of physical effort to create an enormous systemic result. The reason we often miss these brilliant leverage points is that we have been fundamentally mistrained in how to solve problems. In school, we are taught a very neat, perfectly linear model of problem solving. First, you clearly define the exact problem. Second, you brainstorm a list of possible solutions. Third, you evaluate those solutions. And fourth, you execute the best one. This linear model is beautiful, clean, and entirely utterly useless in a chaotic real-world crisis. It assumes that the world will politely hit the pause button and stand completely still while you analyze it. But in the real world, problems do not hold still. The environment is dynamic, information is missing, and time is rapidly evaporating. If you try to force a messy reality into a neat, step-by-step checklist, you will remain perpetually paralyzed. True problem solving is fiercely non-linear. In high-stakes situations, you almost never have a perfectly defined problem when you start. Instead, the very act of trying to solve the problem changes your understanding of what the problem actually is. Your goals do not remain locked in place. They constantly shift, mutate, and co-evolve as you take action and the environment pushes back. Imagine an experienced emergency management director coordinating an outdoor music festival when a freak torrential flash flood washes away the only access road. Thousands of people are stranded in a rapidly muddying field, and the water is rising. If the director were a linear thinker, she would define the problem precisely as she was taught. The road is broken, so the goal is to fix the road to get the buses out. She would spend hours trying to locate gravel, heavy machinery, and engineers to rebuild the asphalt, all while the crowd panicked and the floodwaters rose. She would fail because she refused to let her goal evolve. But a seasoned, non-linear thinker does not lock onto a single, rigid goal. She surveys the chaotic scene and allows her understanding of the crisis to remain fluid. She looks at the washed-out road and realizes that fixing it is impossible. Instantly, her goal shifts from repairing the road to simply moving the people across the mud. She looks at the surrounding area and notices a dozen massive flatbed vendor trucks abandoned on the high ground. As she looks at those trucks, her goal shifts again. It moves from moving the people through the mud to elevating the people above the mud. She immediately orders her crews to drive the heavy flatbeds directly into the flooded gap, parking them end to end to create a massive steel pontoon bridge. She did not sit in a tent, define a problem, and brainstorm a bridge. The problem and the solution emerged simultaneously. She used the environment itself as a tool to help her think allowing the physical objects around her to suggest new goals and new possibilities. She acted, observed how the environment reacted, and adjusted her trajectory on the fly. This is the essence of non-linear problem solving. It is a dance with reality, a continuous loop of perceiving, acting, and adapting, where the final solution looks absolutely nothing like the initial plan. When you feel stuck, when the obstacle in front of you seems entirely unmovable, you must resist the temptation to just push harder. You must let go of the comforting illusion that you can perfectly map out every step of the journey before you take your first stride. Step back. Look at the entire system. Search the periphery of your vision for the hidden hinges and the quiet bottlenecks. Do not be afraid to take a small, probing action just to see how the system reacts, and be entirely willing to abandon your original goal the moment a better, more elegant solution reveals itself. You do not need to tear down the entire wall. You only need to find the leverage point, apply a little pressure, and watch the obstacle collapse under its own weight. Chapter 6. Seeing the invisible. Imagine two people standing side by side, looking at the exact same scene. They have the same optical biology, the same lighting, and the same vantage point, yet they are living in completely different realities, where one person sees a chaotic, overwhelming jumble of random details. The other sees a perfectly organized system, where one person sees absolute safety. The other sees an imminent, catastrophic collapse. We tend to believe that vision is an objective truth, that our eyes simply act as a camera, recording the world exactly as it is. But true expertise does not reside in the eyes, it resides in the mind behind them. The defining hallmark of a master in any field is the extraordinary capacity to see the invisible. To understand this, we must look at the vibrant, high-decibel world of live event production. Consider a massive outdoor music festival with 80,000 fans screaming in the summer heat on a towering stage rigged with millions of watts of audio and lighting power. Beneath the stage, in a dark, cable-strewn bunker, sits a team of audio technicians. A junior technician is staring intently at a bank of glowing digital monitors. The screens show the power output, the thermal levels, and the signal flow. Every bar is flashing in the safe green zone. By every objective measurement available to the novice, the system is performing flawlessly. Beside him stands the veteran audio director, a woman who has spent 30 years wiring stadiums across the globe. She is not looking at the screens. She has her eyes closed. She is feeling the heavy vibration of the subwoofers through the soles of her boots and listening to the ambient noise beneath the roar of the music. Suddenly, her eyes snap open. She reaches over the junior technician's shoulder, grabs the master power relay, and instantly kills the main electrical feed to the left side of the stage array. The stadium is plunged into a jarring, lopsided half-silence. The junior technician is horrified, demanding to know why she just ruined the concert when all the monitors indicated perfect health. The veteran does not argue. She grabs a fire extinguisher, sprints toward a massive metal-cased amplifier stack 50 feet away, and arrives just as a thick plume of black electrical smoke erupts from the vents. A tiny internal cooling fan had failed. The sensors had not picked up the localized heat spike yet, but the veteran had heard it, or rather, she had heard the absence of it, amidst the deafening volume of an entire rock concert. Her experienced mind had noticed a missing harmonic frequency, a tiny, high-pitched whir that was supposed to be running beneath the bass. She was not reacting to a loud warning siren. She was reacting to a deeply subtle silence. This is the power to spot anomalies, and it is a cognitive miracle that beginners are entirely incapable of performing. Novices are constantly overwhelmed by the foreground, struggling just to identify the basic visible cues that they have been trained to look for. They need explicit rules and flashing warning lights because they cannot yet perceive the underlying dynamics of the environment. But the expert mind transcends these basic rules. Through thousands of hours of lived experience, experts build a vast internal database of patterns, which allows them to constantly monitor the background rhythm of their environment. When a piece of that pattern is missing, or when an element shifts slightly out of place, the expert's mind immediately flags the anomaly, rendering the invisible completely visible. This invisible world contains far more than just missing sounds or subtle visual cues. Experts can actually see into the past and the future. When a highly experienced person walks into a room, they do not just see a static snapshot of the present moment. Their profound situation awareness allows them to instantly read the antecedents that created the current reality, while simultaneously projecting the exact consequences that will inevitably follow. Picture a master arborist walking into a busy metropolitan park to inspect a towering century-old oak tree. To the city planners and the novice landscapers, the tree is a picture of magnificent health. Its canopy is thick and green, casting a vast, beautiful shadow over a newly paved concrete walkway. They see a permanent, unmoving monument of nature. The master arborist, however, sees a violent, slow-motion battle. He runs his hands over the rough bark and notices a faint vertical seam of discoloration facing the east. He looks down at the ground and observes a microscopic, powdery fungal growth near the root flare, right where the new concrete sidewalk meets the soil. The arborist does not just see leaves and wood. He sees the way things work. His mind automatically simulates the invisible, subterranean reality. He visualizes how the newly poured concrete has cut off the oxygen and water supply to the eastern root system. He sees the invisible rot creeping up the interior heartwood, severely weakening the structural integrity of the massive trunk. He looks up at the heavy canopy and instantly projects the future. He knows that when the inevitable winter storms roll in with heavy eastern winds, the compromised root system will completely fail, and the giant tree will violently crush the pedestrian walkway. He immediately recommends a severe pruning of the canopy and the installation of heavy steel support cables. The city planners argue, complaining about the high cost and the aesthetic damage to a seemingly healthy tree. But the arborist holds firm, explaining the invisible mechanics of the tension and the rot. Reluctantly, the city complies. 3 months later, a historic gale sweeps through the city, toppling dozens of trees. The giant oak groans and leans heavily under the wind, but the steel cables catch the tension. The tree holds. A tragedy is quietly averted because one person had the ability to look past the green leaves and see the invisible decay. This level of perception is fundamentally about making fine discriminations. Where a beginner sees a solid block of color, the master sees 50 distinct shades. Where the beginner sees a singular, insurmountable problem, the expert sees a landscape rich with hidden opportunities and avenues for brilliant improvisation. Because experts understand the deep mechanics of how their environment operates, they are not rigidly bound by standard operating procedures. They know exactly which rules can be safely bent and which protocols can be creatively adapted to leverage an unexpected advantage. Perhaps the most profound invisible reality that true masters can perceive is the boundary of their own competence. A novice is often dangerously confident, entirely blind to the vast ocean of knowledge they do not yet possess. They do not know what they do not know, but the master has spent a lifetime mapping the edges of their own mind. They are acutely aware of their own limitations. They can sense the precise moment when a situation shifts outside their internal database of prototypes, and they know exactly when it is time to stop trusting their instincts and start asking for help. Developing this extraordinary vision is not a matter of simply trying harder or straining your eyes. It requires a relentless commitment to immersing yourself in the messy, complex reality of your chosen field. It means leaning into the difficult experiences, constantly testing your assumptions, and paying deep attention to the subtle rhythms that everyone else is ignoring. You must learn to look past the bright, flashing lights of the foreground. True mastery is waiting in the shadows, in the silences, and in the spaces between the rules. When you finally learn to perceive what is not there, the entire world opens up before you. Chapter 7. the architecture of experience, stories, and metaphors. Human memory is not a sterile filing cabinet filled with spreadsheets, raw data, and isolated facts. If you try to recall the most important lessons you have learned in your life, you will not retrieve a bulleted list of abstract principles. Instead, you will remember the exact color of the sky on the day you made a terrible mistake. You will remember the tone of a mentor's voice when they gave you a piece of advice that changed your career. You will remember the sequence of events, the tension, the climax, and the resolution. We are fundamentally narrative creatures, and our brains are exquisitely designed to package the vast, overwhelming complexity of the world into the elegant structure of a story. When we step into a high-stakes, confusing environment, we do not query a mental database. We browse our internal library of narratives. We look for a story that matches the chaos in front of us, because stories are the primary tools we use to make sense of events. A good story contains actors, intentions, a sequence of causes and effects, and an outcome. By organizing raw, chaotic information into this familiar structure, we can instantly understand what is happening, why it is happening, and what we need to do next. Imagine a seasoned pediatrician working the night shift in a busy metropolitan hospital. A young couple rushes in with their 5-year-old son. The child is presenting a bizarre, seemingly disconnected array of symptoms: a spiking fever, a strange asymmetrical rash on his arms, severe lethargy, and a dry cough. The young, highly educated medical residents quickly surround the boy, drawing blood and ordering a battery of expensive laboratory tests. They are looking at the raw data, treating each symptom in isolation, and preparing to throw broad-spectrum medications at the problem while they wait for the results. The veteran pediatrician steps into the room, gently waves the residents back, and sits down with the terrified parents. She does not immediately look at the child's throat or check his temperature. Instead, she asks the parents to tell her a story. She wants to know everything about the family's life over the past 3 weeks. She listens intently as they describe a recent weekend camping trip, a sudden rainstorm that forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned, dusty ranger cabin, and a strange incident where the family dog chased a wild rodent into the brush. The doctor is not just making polite conversation to calm the parents down, she is actively constructing a causal narrative. The isolated symptoms the child is experiencing are merely the ending of a story. To make sense of the outcome, she desperately needs the beginning and the middle. The laboratory data alone is too ambiguous, but once the narrative elements lock into place, the specific region they camped in, the dust in the abandoned cabin, the timeline of the dog's behavior, the diagnosis suddenly becomes obvious. She recognizes the narrative architecture of a very specific, localized tick-borne illness. By using a story to link the disparate clues together, she is able to bypass hours of unnecessary testing and immediately administer the exact targeted treatment that saves the child's life. But what happens when we face a situation that is so completely novel, so unprecedented, that we do not have a matching story in our mental library? What do we do when the crisis in front of us looks like absolutely nothing we have ever seen before? This is where the human mind deploys another profound cognitive strength. We use the power of metaphors and analogies. When we are stripped of direct experience, we do not start from zero. We instinctively draw a parallel between the strange new problem and something completely different that we already deeply understand. We borrow the logic of a familiar domain and map it directly onto our current, unfamiliar reality. Consider a brilliant team of structural engineers who are hopelessly stuck on a massive civic project. They have been tasked with designing a revolutionary cooling system for a sprawling underground subway hub in a sweltering city. The traditional methods of massive industrial fans and liquid heat sinks are failing. The energy required to run them is simply too high, and the underground tunnels are trapping the heat. The engineers are exhausted, staring at thermodynamic charts and getting absolutely nowhere because they are trapped within the rigid, standard stories of mechanical engineering. Then, an engineer who grew up on a farm in a harsh, arid climate looks at the 3-dimensional rendering of the subway hub. He stops seeing a concrete train station and instead sees something entirely biological. He sees a termite mound. He remembers that termites build towering mud structures in the blistering desert heat, yet they maintain perfectly stable, cool internal temperatures. They achieve this without electricity or fans, relying entirely on a complex network of passive ventilation tunnels that draw cool air from the deep, damp earth and naturally expel rising heat out through a central chimney. He takes this biological analog and superimposes it onto the concrete blueprints. He completely shifts the paradigm of the team. He uses the logic of the termite mound analogy to design a completely novel passive cooling chassis for the subway station, utilizing the movement of the trains themselves to drive convective airflow through a series of carefully angled, natural heat chimneys. The solution is elegant, wildly cost-effective, and entirely born from the ability to say, this impossible problem is actually just like this completely unrelated thing. Metaphors and analogies are not just poetic flourishes or campfire entertainment. They are robust, critical mechanisms for high-level reasoning and problem-solving. They allow us to instantly transfer our wisdom across boundaries, taking the hard-earned lessons from one area of our lives and using them to unlock the mysteries of another. This is the true architecture of human experience. We do not navigate the world through raw computation. We navigate it through the profound, resonant power of narrative. Every time you overcome a struggle, you write a new story in your mind, consolidating that experience so it is permanently available to protect you in the future. And every time you share that story, you grant that protection to someone else. When we embrace the way our minds naturally package the world into stories and metaphors, we stop fighting our own instincts. We realize that our lived experience, with all its messy, emotional, human depth, is the greatest cognitive asset we will ever possess. Chapter 8. Reading Minds and Communicating Intent. In the high-stakes world of military command, there is a fundamental truth that holds just as firmly in the corporate boardroom or a complex household. You cannot survive if you are forced to micromanage every single action of your team. You will be paralyzed by your own need for control, and your team will be paralyzed by their constant need for your permission. True success relies on a different, more profound source of power. The ability to read the minds of your colleagues and, in turn, to effectively communicate your own intent to them so that they can act with absolute independence and total synchronization. When we speak of reading minds, we are not talking about psychic ability. We are talking about the intuitive grasp of intent. It is the ability to look at a partner, a teammate, or a subordinate and know, without a single word being spoken, what they are trying to achieve and why they are making their current choices. This happens in the silent, rapid-fire assessment of a veteran sports team where a player makes a pass to a space on the field that their teammate has not yet reached, trusting completely that the teammate knows the goal and will be there. They are sharing a common, invisible intent. However, the art of communicating intent is where many leaders and many human beings dramatically fail. We often mistake communication for the transmission of rigid, step-by-step instructions. We believe that if we just give someone a precise, detailed list of every action they must take, we have communicated effectively. But in a volatile, rapidly changing environment, rigid instructions are a liability. The moment the reality on the ground shifts, the moment the opponent changes their strategy, the technology fails, or the weather turns, your perfect, detailed plan becomes obsolete. Your team is then left following instructions for a world that no longer exists. The alternative is to communicate the why rather than just the what. When you focus on communicating your intent, the underlying goal, the reason behind the mission, and the overarching vision of what a successful outcome looks like, you empower your team to become an extension of your own mind. Imagine a commander in a chaotic, fast-moving crisis. Instead of shouting specific tactical orders that will be irrelevant in 10 minutes, she clearly articulates the central intent. Our absolute priority is to secure the safety of the civilians in the northern sector before the floodwaters crest. Everything else, the equipment, the vehicles, even the secondary objectives, is secondary to that singular primary goal. Because she has clearly communicated this intent, she does not need to worry about what her squad leaders are doing when they are out of her sight. One squad leader might decide to leave their primary truck behind to save time moving on foot. Another might decide to commandeer a local fishing boat. If they had been following rigid, step-by-step instructions, these deviations would look like insubordination. But because they understand the commander's intent, these independent actions are actually the most effective ways to achieve her goal. They are empowered to improvise, to adapt, and to seize local opportunities that the commander could never have seen from her vantage point. Effective communication of intent is not just about what you say, it is about ensuring that you are understood. There is a deep psychological art to this. You must consider the perspective of the person receiving the information. What do they already know? What are their current constraints? By framing your intent in a way that respects their intelligence and expertise, you build a shared mental model that allows for rapid, almost telepathic coordination. But this power to read minds and communicate intent is not just about leadership, it is about every human relationship. How often do we argue with our partners, our friends, or our colleagues because we are obsessed with the what, the specific way we think something should be done, rather than the why, the actual desire or need we are trying to fulfill? When we stop fighting over the specific steps and start sharing our true intent, the arguments often vanish. We realize that we are usually trying to achieve the same result, and once that shared purpose is revealed, the path forward becomes obvious. To master this skill, you must become a student of the people around you. You must practice the discipline of expressing your intent clearly and concisely, focusing on the desired outcome rather than the specific mechanics. And most importantly, you must cultivate the trust that allows you to let go. When you have communicated your intent, you have given your team the greatest gift possible, the autonomy to do what is necessary to succeed. You are no longer managing their hands, you are aligning their hearts and minds with yours, and in that synchronization, you unlock a level of power that no rigid set of instructions could ever achieve. Chapter 9. The Power of the Team Mind. In any high-performance environment, whether it is a surgical team in an operating room, a flight crew in a cockpit, or a tactical unit in the field, the most effective teams do not function as a collection of independent experts. They function as a single, unified cognitive entity, a team mind. This team mind is not merely the sum of the individuals involved, it is a higher-level capacity that emerges when a group of people achieves deep, fluid synchronization. The concept of a team mind explains why certain crews can handle catastrophic failures that would utterly destroy less synchronized groups. It allows them to distribute the immense mental workload required for complex decision-making. In a crisis, the team mind functions by having members monitor each other's performance, catch each other's mistakes, and seamlessly fill the gaps in one another's situation awareness. When one member is becoming overloaded by the sheer volume of incoming data, another member instinctively shifts their own focus to provide the necessary support, often without a single word of coordination being exchanged. Developing this level of team intelligence does not happen by accident, nor is it a guaranteed result of simply putting skilled people in the same room. It requires a deliberate, shared history. As teams work together through various challenges, they develop a mutual understanding of each other's strengths, weaknesses, and decision-making styles. They learn the shorthand of communication, where a single glance, a brief gesture, or a partial sentence is enough to convey a complex state of affairs. This shared understanding is what allows the team to develop a collective sense of expectancy, predicting each other's moves and the progression of the mission long before it unfolds. The nature of this team mind is inherently chaotic, yet it remains functional because it is grounded in the shared experience of its members. It is not a rigid hierarchy where information flows only in one direction. Instead, it is a dynamic, shifting network of interaction. In the best teams, such as elite, wildland, firefighting units, this fluidity is a matter of survival. These teams operate in environments of extreme danger, where the situation changes constantly and unpredictably. They maintain synchronization because they are all deeply calibrated to the same mission-critical cues, and they trust that each member is monitoring their own specific sector of the chaotic environment. However, the team mind can also fall into dangerous illusions of rationality. When a team becomes overly reliant on formal structures, they may spend too much time caucusing, debating every potential path, and attempting to force their interactions into a perfect analytical framework. They may get so caught up in the process of making a decision that they lose sight of the reality of the crisis they are facing. We've observed crisis management teams that essentially paralyzed themselves because they insisted on holding formal meetings for every minor shift in the situation, ultimately failing to take the timely action required by the unfolding event. A truly effective team mind knows when to be formal and when to be fast. They recognize that there are times for collective reflection and times when the authority of the leader must be absolute to drive immediate action. The team mind functions most effectively when it operates as a metaphor for individual thinking. It possesses a capacity for both diagnostic deliberation and rapid, intuitive response. To build a team mind, you must move beyond the basic mechanics of coordination. You must create opportunities for your team to experience the friction of difficult, realistic scenarios together, providing them with the feedback and the reflective time needed to internalize each other's cognitive rhythms. You must encourage a culture where every member feels the responsibility to monitor the big picture and the freedom to speak up when they spot an anomaly that the leader might have missed. The most powerful teams do not need a mountain of protocols to ensure they stay aligned. They possess a deep, shared mental model that allows them to adapt with frightening speed and precision. When you reach that level of synchronization, you no longer feel like a group of separate individuals working toward a common goal. You feel like a single, intelligent force capable of navigating the most complex, threatening environments with the effortless grace of a master at work. Chapter 10. The Balance of Reason and Instinct. We have spent our time exploring the extraordinary powers of the human mind, the ways we use intuition to size up a situation in a heartbeat, mental simulation to peer into the future, and storytelling to make sense of our complex past. We have seen that the most experienced among us do not navigate life by meticulously filling out spreadsheets or comparing endless lists of options. They navigate through the deep, rapid-fire application of experience. But this brings us to a final, vital question. What is the place of rational, formal analysis in this world of instinct? It is easy to fall into the trap of believing that because intuition and mental simulation are so powerful, formal analysis is somehow useless or outdated. This is a mistake. Rational thinking is a vital tool, but it is a specialized one. We rely on formal analysis when we are truly venturing into the unknown, when our base of experience is insufficient to give us an intuitive answer, and when we have the luxury of time to think our way through a problem from scratch. If you are buying a home or a new car, you are often acting as a novice. You do not have the thousands of experiences necessary to make a rapid, intuitive judgment, so you fall back on the rational choice strategy, defining your criteria, weighing your priorities, and comparing your options. Analysis is the fallback mechanism for when our expertise runs dry. The danger begins when we fall into the trap of hyper-rationality, the belief that if some analysis is good, more must be better. We have been taught that if we just apply enough math, enough data, and enough process, we can eliminate all risk and guarantee a perfect decision. But this ignores the reality of the world we live in. Rigorous, quantitative analysis has significant advantages. It provides a clear defensible record of how a conclusion was reached. It is inherently quantitative, and it helps novices uncover the gaps in their own understanding. However, these methods are often too restrictive for the real world. They assume you have all the information, that the goals are perfectly stable, and that you have the time to complete the calculation before the situation transforms. In high-stakes, time-pressured settings, the rigorous analytical approach is not an ideal. It is often a path to paralysis. Even the most capable, experienced people make poor decisions, but it is rarely because they lacked a spreadsheet or failed to follow a formal process. Errors in natural high-stakes settings are usually driven by the fundamental challenges of the environment, the crushing weight of severe stress, the destabilizing effect of deep uncertainty, and the cognitive strain of trying to interpret ambiguous, incomplete data. Sometimes, we fall into the trap of superstition, mistaking a lucky outcome for evidence that our flawed internal model was actually correct. Other times, we simply become too confident in our own stories, explaining away the very evidence that should have served as our warning. Ultimately, the goal is not to choose between reason and instinct. The goal is to cultivate a balanced, mature wisdom. We must learn to trust our experience, yet maintain the humility to listen when the environment speaks to us through anomalies and surprises. We must use formal analysis to help us structure the problems we do not yet understand, while relying on our recognition engine to carry us through the ones we have lived 1,000 times before. The journey to better decision-making is not about finding a magic 30-day cure for human error. It is about committing to a lifetime of deliberate practice. It is about seeking out environments where we can get accurate, timely feedback on our judgments, so we know when we are right and, more importantly, when we are wrong. It is about developing the discipline to reflect on our past experiences, recycling them into new lessons so that every single day adds to the power and accuracy of our internal databases. As you move forward, remember that you are the primary instrument of your own success. Your mind is a multi-purpose, self-adapting simulator of unparalleled versatility. It has carried you through every crisis you have ever faced, and it is capable of guiding you through every challenge still to come. Stop apologizing for your instincts. Stop feeling guilty for not being a machine, and start owning the immense, deep, and brilliant power of your own lived experience. You know more than you think you know, and you are far more capable than the rigid, analytical world has ever given you credit for. Trust the engine that has been built over a lifetime and step forward into the uncertainty with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who finally understands how they truly think.